All right. So as we're headed back towards Wolf Point, I'd like to answer some of the questions I normally get asked, like, how much are those townhomes? One of those is a 4-bedroom place, went for about $2.5 million, which means it is the same amount of bedrooms as the Trump penthouse, but you save $17.5 million. So it's a steal. The River Cottages are a little cheaper, not by much, $2.25 million, but they don't come on the market very often. There are 4 of them. 3 out of the 4 are still owned by the same people who bought them when they first opened up. Nobody wants to give those away. And then the East Bank Club is a high-end fitness center and club. A monthly membership is pretty pricey, but you get to work out in the same place Obama and Oprah did, so that's kind of cool. As we head back towards the Lake Street Bridge, I get asked a lot, do we still raise these bridges? Yes, we do, just not very often anymore. All the boats that are normally on the river, our boats, the fire boats, other tour boats, stuff like that, we're designed to go under the bridges. It is not a problem for us. Nowadays, we mainly raise them so that people can get their private yachts off the lake so they don't freeze in the winter. So we raise them on Wednesdays and Saturdays in the spring and the fall. I did find out recently you can pay to have them raise the bridge when it's not on that set schedule. A boat did it recently, raise 2 bridges. It cost them $40,000, which feels like a lot of money. And then you remember, it's a boat that doesn't fit under these bridges. So $40,000 probably means nothing to them. They are still doing okay. Before we leave Wolf Point, though, I want to draw your attention to your right, where this Y-shaped building is, 150 North Riverside. Why is it shaped like that? Well, Chicago has a rule that buildings must be built 30 feet back from the riverfront to make way for the river walk. But the other side of the building is train lines, and you can't build on those. So this building is pinched between those 2 immovable objects, meaning its base is only 39 feet wide. That's about as wide as a school bus is long. That is not very big for a building. And a very skinny building, a very windy city. You can see how that might cause some problems. Which is why, on the top level of that building, made you look, it's inside, you can't see it, but there are 12 giant tanks of water. These are called inertial slosh dampers, and as the wind blows the building one way, the water in the tanks sloshes the other. It goes back and forth, slowing the building down and reducing its sway. It's a very cool system. Only 2 buildings in Chicago have it. We're going to talk about the other one later on the tour. But right now, if you want a cool photo opportunity, if you look up, you might be able to see a reflection in the building's window. You can at least see our boat, though. As we continue further down the South Branch, coming up on your left, right on the other side of this bridge, we have this tall glass building, 110 North Wacker, otherwise known as the Bank of America building. And if any of you are patrons of Bank of America, congratulations! This is what your money's been going towards the past couple of years. Building like this takes about 3 years and $800 million to make. You built a very expensive building. I hope you like it. As we head out the other side of the bridge, you will notice this building also already known this building was from the 20s because it has those inset windows, the pinstripe suit and machine-made precision. It is an Art Deco building. Unfortunately, it was built in 1929, and if you are familiar with U.S. history, you're aware of what happened next. Everything went bad. There was the Great Depression, and then we went to war. So for 25 years here in Chicago, we Center 4. But this generation of architects was doing stuff a little bit differently. Now this generation of architects was fed up with the previous ones. Everybody before them kept saying, stay on the lines, make a box, don't make a fuss. And this generation said, we're different, we're cool, we're gnarly, it's the 80s, we're making weird, curvy structures. Meaning contextualism got its start in the 80s. Because you can see Gateway Center 4 has that curve to mimic the river, and that reflective glass to show off its surroundings. So as we head under this next bridge, you will be safe and sound back in good old 2023. But now you're aware of how architecture has evolved in Chicago and most of America. From elegant cathedrals emulating Europe in the early 20s to machine-made Art Deco in the late 20s. America went to war, and when we returned, we built serious big black boxes in the 60s, followed by big white boxes in the 70s, and then big curvy boxes in the 80s and effortless. Now some of you might recognize this next building on your right if you saw Batman: The Dark Knight, because obviously that is Gotham Bank. If you remember, in the opening scene of the movie, Joker's gang ziplines down onto the roof of this building, they rob the bank, and at the end of the scene, Joker drives a school bus out the side and escapes down this street. He thought he was getting away with a bunch of cash. He probably got away with a bunch of old catalogs, because that is not Gotham Bank. It is Old Main, Chicago's largest post office. Although, as you will see on the other side of this bridge, it is not a post office anymore. It's now offices for Uber and Walgreens, among other businesses. But while Batman was filming here, this building was deserted. So it's a great example of how Chicago keeps our architecture. We will take a rundown building, keep the beautiful exterior, but renovate the inside, bringing some life back to it. And don't worry, this building was not a waste of space. It did have to be this big, because back in the day, that building was the mail order catalog capital of the world. Everybody everywhere wanted to know what Sears department store was up to, and this building had to take care of it. Now Captain Lair is going to take us a little further down the South Branch before he spins the boat around and takes us back up it. But I'm going to stop talking about buildings for a bit. Instead, I'm going to switch over to story time. Play some stories about the history of Chicago that help explain how the city took the shape it has today. But I will do that on the other side of this bridge, because this is usually a very loud bridge. Story time. So, story number one is the fire. Some of you might have heard about a certain Chicago fire. Kind of big deal. Lots of people were talking about it. Well, this fire happened on the night of October 8th, 1871, just a few blocks away from us, right over there to your right. Now, it started as a very small fire, but 30-mile-per-hour winds whipped it up into a blazing inferno. And at this point in the city's history, this river was gross. It was a sewer, and it was covered in a sheet of oil. Now, these 30-mile-per-hour winds had created literal fire tornadoes, which were moving closer and closer and caught the river itself on fire. The wind continued to push it, and the fire spread to the rest of the city, burning most of it down. In the end, 18,000 buildings were destroyed, 100,000 people were left homeless, and 300 more perished in the fire. Chicago was devastated, and they were looking for someone, anyone, to blame for this tragedy. They picked the obvious choice, and they blamed a cow. Some of you may be familiar with this legend. Chicago has been spreading it for quite some time. The legend goes that on that same fateful night, in that same fateful place, Mrs. Catherine O'Leary went to sleep. But in the barn next door, her cow stayed awake, and this cow purposefully and with malicious intent kicked over a kerosene lantern, lighting the barn on fire, and soon the whole city with it. And like any good legend, it does have a kernel of truth to it, but a lot of it is made up. We know that Mrs. Catherine O'Leary was a real Irish Catholic immigrant woman. She had a barn, we know she had a cow, presumably she had a lantern. We don't actually know how the fire started. In the end, though, it doesn't really matter, because we know it ended with this city being destroyed. And what are you going to do when your whole city burns down? Well, Chicago is a city of second chances. It is a city of redemption, so they called in architects to help rebuild. And these architects started using steel. So when Chicago 2.0 rose from the ashes, it was the birthplace of the first ever 10-story steel frame skyscraper. And a whole city coming back from a fire, surely a story of redemption. But Chicago wasn't done just yet. We cut to 22 years later, which is where story number 2 takes place, the fair. Because at this point, the World's Fair was coming around, and Chicago wanted it. So they sent their politicians out to petition to host it. And this is actually where we got one of our famous nicknames. Because yes, this is a windy city, but that is not how we got that name. We got that name because everybody who met these Chicago politicians had the same thing to say about them. They were long-winded, full of hot air, and windbags. And thus the Windy City was born. And it must have worked, because kind of famously, Chicago got the fair. So now the 1893 World's Fair is in full swing, and it was all planned by Daniel Burnham. This was an architect with a vision for this city and a whole fair to work with, So he designed the White City. This was 200 temporary buildings designed to look like Venice, Italy, gorgeous, classical, European-style architecture, all painted white. If you're wondering what this might have looked like, I suggest heading to the south side to see the Museum of Science and Industry. It is a great example of that style and a very cool place to visit. But unfortunately, everything must come to an end. And 6 months after that fair opened, it closed with an astonishing total of 27 million visitors from 46 different countries. The fair was a huge success. And that takes us to the third and final story, the plan. Because after the fair ended, Chicago still wanted to create. So they hired Daniel Burnham once again to create the first comprehensive urban city plan in the country. He decided to call this the 1909 Daniel Burnham Plan for Chicago, because architects are bad at naming things. It was not an interesting name, but it was a very interesting plan, because he wanted to turn Chicago into the Paris on the prairie. He wanted art, fountains, monuments, views, a city in a garden. He wanted every citizen within walking distance of a park, which is why there are 614 parks in Chicago today. He created this huge plan for our city because the most important thing to him, Daniel Burnham's most famous saying, was make no little plans, for they have no magic to stir men's blood. And looking around at Chicago today, I don't think he made any little plans. And so with those three stories, we can see how Chicago took its shape. The fire destroyed, the fair resurrected, and the plan completed. Now without those three stories, I don't think any of you would even be here today, because you'd just be on some random boat in some tiny little town, listening to me yell about a cow that ruined our city. End of story time, but back to the buildings once we get a little bit closer, and I drank a lot more water. Now in just a moment, we're going to spin this boat around to take you back up this south branch. I'll be walking around, so if you have any questions, you need anything, just let me know.